Okay, so today guys, we're going to talk about directors marking their scripts. So this sort of array of, as Ken put, serial killer kind of ransom note-y kind of stuff is really what your scripts should start to look like as you start to make your film. A shooting script is never a clean thing for a director. A shooting script is filled with all kinds of marks. Now when you look at this, you're going to go, well, this looks like a mess. But actually there's logic to this, and we'll talk about that. I think there's a tendency, and I see this over and over again, to look upon a script like, and I've said this before, like IKEA instructions. Like you look at the script like, well, this tells me what the movie is, and if I just follow these instructions, then the film will manifest. The film will come to be. As long as I follow these instructions. And to a certain degree, that makes sense. You spent a lot of time in meetings developing this script and making the script make sense and getting the beats and the transitions, and you spent months and months and months. So when you get to that point that you're like, okay, now we're going to shoot the thing, there is a tendency to go, okay, that's it. But as we've talked about, and I see this again, when you get out and start putting the scene on its feet, so to speak, when you get the actors in there and you start to rehearse, this thing that's paper suddenly becomes physicalized. And oftentimes it shows itself to be slightly different and often better than what you had in your head. So what happens is, as a director, is that you're faced with this thing where you're like, okay, I'm looking at this and it's different. And it may even be better, but I have this thing and I've got to follow this, and you don't have time to change anything. And I think you have to be able to be malleable. A film is not, it's not a building, it's not a piece of IKEA furniture, it's a living, breathing thing. And so the first thing you have to do is get your script on paper. Yesterday we had a director shooting on the stage, and he constantly was opening up his laptop and trying to scroll through and find lines for the actor, because the actor was like, line, line, and he was like, wait a minute, you know. I don't think even in this digital age when everything is on an iPad, it's not practical. And I love trees, but there's a reason why in every film, do you guys know what this is? Have you guys seen this before? What is this? Sides. This is from the last film I did. And there's a reason why I have this, and by the way, you can see it even on my sides, even though, look, I've got storyboards here just like from the last picture. Carry this around with me because you want to reference this. You want to reference this. The reason why it's small, everybody gets a small one. Why should it be small? Why is it better to have...
Convenient.
Yes, convenient, because who wants to carry around an entire shooting script and have to flip through, wait a minute, what scene are we doing? Wait a minute, wait a minute. So the only thing this is what you're shooting on the day. This is only what you're shooting on the day. Now, if you're lucky, it'll only be a couple of pages. For some reason, on this show, a lot of pages. But it's very light, it's very handy. Now, why do you want this to be on paper? Why is it important that this be on paper?
Convenient.
What does that mean?
You don't need to look up the laptop.
Okay, but what else? What's paper good for? Writing on it.
Yeah.
So what are you going to write on this thing while you're making your malleable, living, breathing movie? What kind of notes, besides storyboards, because we talked about storyboards, what else are you going to write on this thing? What could you possibly be using this?
Your lunch order.
Anything comes up in your mind.
Anything that comes up in your mind. Okay, that's a good point. Let's put away this super scribble for a second, and let's look at this, which is actually the first page of a script, a feature script. It was my second feature that I made, and this script is dated 1996, so it shows you how old this script is. And earlier I showed you this. This is just this image is one of the things I showed you earlier in the semester, which was kind of a guiding image, which you can't see here, but it was just the visual sort of overall mood. When we were talking about lookbooks, we talked about this. But what I want to say is already, and I haven't looked at this since 1996, I was already writing on this script. This is the shooting script. And the first thing I noticed, and this may seem pretentious, but I'm reading what I wrote on the top of this script. It says, the distance between these people, the isolation and the visual depiction of those spaces, and when those spaces close. Okay, so that's almost like poetry there. I don't say so myself. But the reason I wrote that is, and believe me, this is not because Jana was back there in 1996 saying, what's the theme of your movie? I was trying to figure out for myself, what is this movie about? What am I making here? And in this story, it's about alienated people who think they should be together and they don't get together. And I was trying to sort it out. And I remember writing this on the cover page. And then I started writing things like the darkness, black, something about the distances and darkness. And I started to write these initial notes down. And then I look down here and I see down at the bottom, because the script didn't tell me what time of year it is, I wrote wardrobe, season, fall, cold. That seemed to support the overall theme. And then I made another note, which is a camera thing here, which says ability to change frame rates mid-shot. I even put split focus lens, which is a diopter, which is a whole other thing. So on this page, on this first cover page, even though nobody told me or in school said, mark your script, I was already taking this thing and saying, these are the themes. This is maybe going to affect wardrobe. This is a technical thing about camera, things that I want to do. I was already imagining, can I do something where, like I saw in Raging Bull, where in mid-shot, can I go from 24 frames to 48 frames to 72 frames to 12 frames? There are certain shots that I wanted to do. I've got to address that. So it's something that you can use before you shoot, but also it's something that you do while you shoot. And different directors do it differently, and it can be semi-organized or not, but I'm looking at another page from the script, and I showed you this last time. I showed you it because of storyboards. This is from the same movie, and I'm looking again at the markings, not the pictures, but the markings. Okay, so in this first line, there's a line of dialogue that says, I saw a dead clerk at Save-On, which is like a Walgreens type store, and I realized that for a legal reason, Save-On I couldn't use. So I've circled that, and I changed the line to a made-up store called Thrift Co. Because for legal reasons, I couldn't use the Walgreens, so I came up with, but I wrote it in there. I wrote it in there because I remembered it. And then you see I start to circle and square things like paramedics. They're in the scene. An ambulance. I made a note about lighting, slow-mo lighting. I made a note about tilting up here. Something about there's several prostitutes in the scene, and it says in front of several prostitutes what the script. So I had to decide. Maybe there are 3. Then I wrote 2 together, and I added something here. I wrote in a pimp in an alcove. I have notes here about the lens. Long lens. I even had a line here that I wrote in for the prostitute, which is not in the script, which is something like, hi, sweetie, you lonely tonight? Because I figured maybe the prostitute should actually say something. So the notes that you make on your script can be anything. They can refer to departments, camera, lenses. It can refer to wardrobe. It can refer to casting. It can also refer to, it's also useful to write in new lines of dialogue. It's also useful to write in blocking notes. I mean, another from the same script. I make a note here, sits. So if you're blocking, and by the way, until you actually start rehearsing, you may have in your script, he walks across the room, he sits in a chair, but when you start rehearsing and suddenly he sits in a different spot, or he gets up at a different spot while you're rehearsing, how are you going to remember that? You can kind of hope the actors remember it, but if you're doing coverage, if this person gets up in the middle of a line and you're going to do 3 different angles, who's going to remember that? Well, you could have a script supervisor there writing it down. But on a low budget, and particularly for your own brain, you should get out that piece of paper and write down, he stands, he sits, she crosses, so that you have that. So it has to be something that's alive while you're doing it. Also, I remember I did a film once with this actor, Isaiah Washington, a very serious-minded actor. And he left his script open when he went to the bathroom. And I remember I looked over at his script, and it was covered in notes, all character motivation notes, things that he wanted to remember about why his character was doing things. And I noticed in my own thing, because I have to direct these people, I should know. And even though these are more result-oriented, I made notes about the mood of the scene. Bigger, angrily, gradual, strong. These are how I felt. Ideas behind lines. Is this person afraid or doesn't care what happens to him? Desperate. Demands to know. I have a note down here. Does Peter separate in this moment. In other words, your guys got to make this thing alive. You're not just following what the script says to do. You have to be actively participating, cooperating with the script.
I would say that it's a little bit like converting a recipe, right? When you have a script, it's a recipe to make something, but you may find that your oven doesn't quite cook at the same temperatures that it says on the dial, and you make a little note. Sometimes it's very technical like that, but you can't keep track of all of those things as a director unless you mark up your script, especially since the cut is in your head largely. So those little specific moments, when you document them on your script, they really are for you in the future, so that you remember what you were trying to accomplish with the scene. I know directors sometimes get into a situation where they have to reshoot something, a piece of something 6 months later during the reshoots, and remembering exactly what you were trying to accomplish with that. You think you'll remember it, but you don't always. And so these notes help you. For those, there's a few camera people in the audience. I do notes. By the way, no director ever shares his markups with me, nor would I expect them to. These are very personal, often encoded in chicken scrawls and things like that. But I make my own notes, and I use whatever method makes sense for me, because part of it is that I've been in pre-production. Also, the operator will make notes. One of the things that happens is something called handoffs, where you're doing a shot where you go between two people in camera and you have to pan. Well, a lot of times the operator has to hear and know that dialogue, but they also may visually mark up their sides so that they know where those beats are another way, not just auditory, but visually. They know that. The boom operator may make notes about have to move back here because the camera's going to go wide, or this and that other thing. So these are for everybody who's on set to keep the flow of information going within your own head. Every department will mark up their scripts for various things, whether it's production design, wardrobe, or whatever.
I totally agree. I mean, if you look at this, this is from 1951. This is the marked script of a director named Fred Zinnemann. This is for a script called High Noon, which was Best Picture in 1952, one of the great character-driven westerns. And I had a good fortune to find, because like Ken says, most directors' marked scripts are not circulated publicly. And I was looking at it, trying to analyze what he was doing. And you could see he blocked out, he was pre-cutting in his mind. This is a close-up of Henderson here. In this part where Henderson is talking, he plans to cut to Cooper. Here, he's blocked out. This is where I'm going to cut to the reaction of Gary Cooper. Close-up, medium long shot. He's made a note here. It says exterior church, but he says shoot in cemetery. So he's making location notes. Pan down, he's making particular camera notes. So I thought this was very encouraging because, again, in film school, no one said boo to me about marking up a script. It was just something I started to do because it made sense. As I was sitting here blocking these two guys, and suddenly Ken got up. How do I remember that? Write it down. Do I want these shoes? Oh yeah, when you come back and we shoot tomorrow, like these shoes. It was a living, breathing thing. So one of the best examples of this sort of approach is really how Francis Coppola tackled The Godfather, which was a very specific situation because he was dealing with something that already existed, which was a novel. So he was adapting from a novel. But this process, check this out, is very thoughtful and exactly what I've been talking about.
When I realized that I was actually going to make a movie out of the novel The Godfather, I sat down and began to read the book very, very carefully. And I think it's important to put your impressions down on the first reading, because those are the initial instincts about what you thought was good or what you didn't understand or what you thought was bad. And so I took the book and I actually wrote my comments right on the book itself. And having gotten through the book with these few notes and comments, I then made a prompt book out of it. A prompt book is sort of an old tradition from theater, and basically you take a sheet of loose leaf paper, and I sat there myself and I cut out this hole in the middle of the page, and then I pulled my book apart that I had made those comments on, and I myself pasted every page of the novel onto sheets of paper like this, so that of course you could see both sides. And then I put really good grommets, those reinforcers on the holes so that that wouldn't tear. I think I put them on both sides. Let me just check. This is years. Yeah, I put it on both sides because I was aware that this prompt book was going to be my master kind of document that I would work from. And I called it The Godfather Notebook and put a big warning, if found, return to this address for reward, because I recognized that it would have every opinion that I had on the book. And interestingly, I decided to break down each section with these key criteria. This is a very big one because it was the wedding scene. One was synopsis, to synopsize that particular part of the book. A paragraph or two saying what up to there really had happened in terms of the story. Number two was the times, which is to say, how did what happened in the story at that point, how do the times bear on it? In this case, it was the 40s, so after World War II, America had a certain style.
Hey, my sister's wedding.
Every scene I was relating it to the period. So when I then was told by Paramount that the movie was going to not be shot period, it was going to be contemporary shot, which is to say the 70s, in fact that we were going to shoot it in Kansas City, I really had a very hard time accepting that and made a big point that it had to be period. And I didn't even remember why I did, because obviously that was going to make the movie more expensive, which is not what they wanted at all. And it must have been because I had just gone through this vast, big, thick book writing notes as to why it had to be, what the 40s had to do with the story. Imagery and tone. This is, of course, images that seem to stand out from reading it, or even the tone of the story. Number 4, it says the core, and this is something I think I borrowed from Elia Kazan in his notes from the way he broke down the play Streetcar Named Desire. It's published in a book on directing. But for 5, I put pitfalls, which was to say, how can I screw this up? What are dangers, things that you want to avoid, or dangers that you very easily could find yourself in? Cliches, Italians who would talk like this, failure to make a convincing setting, boring. People must feel that they're seeing the real thing with hundreds and hundreds of interesting specifics, like the children sliding around the sandwich man, throwing the sandwich. Hey Bino, 2 gabagol and 1 prosciutto. Losing a basic humanity to all these people. Failing to set up a tension between Godfather and Michael. Too much exposition. And I went through the book again. I used to schlep this around in a big bag that I had, and I would sometimes go to a cafe. In particular, in North Beach, I used to go to the old Cafe Trieste and sit in a corner with my Olivetti typewriter and this book. And as I would go through the book for each division, and really I made up the divisions. I broke them down. I noticed here scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, but they didn't exactly follow the chapters. It's sort of what I felt was scene 1 and where it ended. What was interesting is that by doing that, after I had gotten through the whole book, I was able not only to have those first few notes that I had written in the book, but I had the big wide margins that the prompt book pages gave me, so I could in great detail chart what I thought was happening. This document was a kind of multi-layered roadmap for me to direct the film. And I remember when I did direct the film, although there was a script, obviously, I tended to take this around and work on The Godfather. Again, I had that kind of canvas bag where I could carry this, and I was more interested in really working from this because on one level it had the actual book rather than a screenplay which would have left so much out. And so I was able to review not only Mario Puzo's original text, but all my first notation as to what little signs as to what was important to me or what I felt was really going on in the book. Scene 26, Michael picked up by Sollozzo and the killing, parenthesis, key scene. The core, to show the killing as terrifying and explicitly as possible, having taken the tension to an unbearable degree, to further define Michael's character in regards to his cool, totally calm execution of these men. Pitfalls, rushing this would ruin it, otherwise the scene can't be ruined. That's good to know when you're just a poor little director sitting there and somebody says the scene cannot be ruined, so you know you've got something. As I was reading the book and making these notes and then putting them on the margins, obviously the more pens I was using and the more ruler lines and the more squiggly lines sort of implied the excitement of the book was higher and higher, so that the sheer amount of ink on the page would tell me later on this is one of the most important scenes. Design this scene shot for shot. Important, the audience knows he is not following Clemenza's instructions. Clemenza had told him specifically exactly what to do, and if you see that he wasn't doing it, it would be suspenseful. Hitchcock, designed, he chokes, frozen time, hit hard and bloody, his fork frozen midair, gun almost against Sollozzo's head, really close. Get this for the audience. Mist of blood. We went to great length in that scene to put mists of blood in the air. McCluskey's fork frozen midair as he watches Sollozzo's brains fly through the air, his own choking when shot in the throat. There's an asterisk. An asterisk in a book or a script for me means a super important part. The gun in his hand, he starts to leave without dropping it. That's what Clemenza had told me, drop the gun immediately, and he's going and he's not dropping the gun, so hopefully the audience is dying. Drop it, drop it, drop it. He jumps in the car and rolls away. All very easy, should be easy. Michael disappears, we don't see him. Now, pick up the tempo. So I knew just from looking at all these colors and things in the book that this was going to be a very, very important scene. And indeed it was, not only for the movie, but for Al Pacino, because it was in that scene that the executives of Paramount Pictures first caught a glimmer that maybe I had not been crazy in wanting to cast him.